Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Shaykh Hamza Karamali. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Pleasure to be here.
Good to see you again, all the way from Turkey. I'm in London, so hello there. For those who don't know, Hamza is a traditionally trained theologian who specializes in rational arguments for the existence of God and the truth of Islam. All of his work is based on the classical Islamic sciences, such as the sciences of Islamic logic, rational theology, legal theory, hadith authentication, and Quranic exegesis. Lockwood Press has recently published his modern presentation of classical Islamic logic in a book that he has called Discerning Religious Truth, a didactic exposition of the logic and epistemology of the Islamic sciences. And he has also just recently published a textbook on critical thinking in the Islamic tradition called Isa Guje, an introduction to critical thinking, logic, epistemology, and scientific reasoning for students of the classical Islamic sciences. He is here today to talk about his recently published books. Links will be in the description below, and to introduce us to the traditions of logic and critical thinking in the classical Islamic sciences. So without more ado, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul. So these are the two books that you mentioned in the introduction. On the left-hand side, it's Discerning Religious Truth. This is a long, dense book, very technical. I'll introduce what it's about and explain the logic behind it, inshallah. Yeah. On the right-hand side, it's a little bit more accessible. Isa Guje it's one of the most popular introductions to the science of Islamic logic in the Muslim scholarly tradition. Isa Guje is the Arabic word for isagogue. Isagogue means introduction, and isagogue was the name of the most influential introduction to logic in the classical Greek and Christian traditions. And so we'll see that the science of Islamic logic, it developed from the traditions of logic in the classical Western traditions. It came to the Muslim world, and then there were a number of things that happened to it that I will be explaining today. So Discerning Religious Truth, which is the primary book that I want to talk about, it's a long work in progress. It's over 10 years. I've been working on it. It's I worked on it as I was studying and teaching. I worked in a think tank. I worked with Christian philosophers and with scientists, and trying to bring the Islamic sciences of theology and logic into the mainstream discourse. So I had an almost completed translation. It's not exactly a translation. It's a lot more than a translation. I'll explain what's different about it and what it's translating and what it's expressing. But before I continue, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Aaron Spivak, who's the president of ASIPT, Association for Society for Islamic Philosophy and Theology. And he very generously supported this project with the funding of the Temple Foundation. And there's two research assistants, both graduates from Zaytuna College. Now, Marwan Tayan, he was my student before he went to Zaytuna. I wrote one of his letters of recommendation, and mashallah, he's a very brilliant student. Now he's doing his PhD in a related field. And Justin Poe, also a master's graduate from Zaytuna, and also he studied at Dar es-Salaam in Chicago, a traditional Islamic seminary. Now he's teaching in a seminary of his own in the United States. So both of these very bright researchers trained in the traditional Islamic sciences. They were funded by ASIPT to help me take this translation to completion. They're co-authors. And I'd like to thank all of them for making this possible and enabling this work to see the light of day. Wouldn't have been possible without them. So the book it's based on the tradition of logic that Muslims inherited from Aristotle. So what you see here is a trajectory of Aristotle that the world is familiar with. And there's another trajectory that the world is not familiar with. And that's what this book describes. So the trajectory that the world is familiar with, you had Aristotle, and he was one of the first known people to formally describe the way that the mind comes to conclusions. So he's one of the most influential philosophers of all time. He lived in over 300 years before Christ, and in about 500 years after his death, there was a philosopher. His name was Plotinus, and he merged the philosophy of Aristotle and Plato. The most important philosophical questions for hundreds of years, over 1,000 years, were is Aristotle right or is Plato right? And they discussed the positions of these two philosophers. Plotinus, he merged the two, and Porphyry, he was his student. And Porphyry, he wrote a book called The Isagoge. And that was an introduction to logic in order to access Aristotle. Between Porphyry and Ibn Sina, there's many, many centuries. Because philosophy in the Christian world, it didn't thrive. These are known as the Dark Ages. It thrived when it came into the Muslim world. So Ibn Sina, he inherited Neoplatonism, and he Islamized it, and he added his own insights. And then, so he's very important in Western philosophy and the history of Western international history, because the works of Aristotle come through him into the Western world. So they come through him through Spain, Ibn Rushd, Averroes. Ibn Rushd was an Aristotelian through and through. And from him came Maimonides and Aquinas. Maimonides, the most important Jewish theologian, also the personal physician of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. And he learned and studied in Arabic. He has works that he wrote in Arabic that the Muslims commented on, actually, and studied. They were studied as well. And then Thomas Aquinas, the most important Christian philosopher. And then from them, there's the modern science and the Enlightenment. It all happens in reaction to Aristotle through this trajectory. So when this happened, when the Aristotle, as inherited through Aquinas, came into contact with modern science and modern philosophy, there was a conflict between religion and science. Galileo, Newton, there were a number of mistakes that Aristotle made, famous mistakes about whether the earth is the center of the universe or the sun is the center of the universe, whether heavy objects fall faster than lighter objects, whether they fall at the same speed, whether objects have a natural motion within them, or as Newton says, that they shall continue to remain at rest or remain still until acted upon by an external force. Modern science, it responded to Aristotle, and modern science is anti-Aristotelian in its nature. And from this, there came the Enlightenment and the various disciplines of philosophy that we see today. So with Aristotle, when Aristotle was doing logic was an introduction to his systematized thought about everything. He had natural philosophy, he had science, he had ethics, he had politics, and you studied logic in order to do all of these things. And it was an integrated whole. It was a system of thought that you studied, and you understood the universe, you understood God, whatever God meant for him. It was different, but there was a concept of God, and there was a coherent worldview, and logic, it fit together with everything else. After the Enlightenment, there was a fragmentation. So modern logic today, as a result of that, you study logic, study formal logic, and then you study epistemology, you study metaphysics, you study philosophy of mind, you study philosophy of language. Everything is separate. Things are separated. So today, for example, you'll study in modern logic that if A then B, A therefore B. So modern logic studies validity, which is whether the form and structure of an argument entails its conclusion. So in the Islamic logical tradition, one of the classical examples of an argument that's on this form is, if it's daytime, then the sun has risen. It is daytime, therefore the sun has risen. This is a valid argument. It's also a sound argument, meaning that it's correct. But you can take another argument that people make today, which is that if science is true, then religion is a myth. So a popular atheist argument that religion, it attempted to explain how things work, and because they didn't have the scientific explanations for how things worked. So now when we find the scientific explanations, it makes religion defunct. So if science is true, then religion is a myth. Science is true, therefore religion is a myth. So this argument is logically valid. That means that if the first premise is true, and if the second premise is true, then the conclusion follows. It's on the form of if A, then B, A, therefore B. But it's not sound. It's not sound for us. For a materialist, it is sound. But for me, it's not sound. For somebody who comes from the Muslim logical tradition, rational arguments, it's flawed. And it's flawed because the first premise is not true. It's not true that if science is true, then religion is a myth. And but that's not the domain of logic anymore. Now, the only thing logic does is it studies how premises entail their conclusions. And what's happened is that questions of epistemology, questions of metaphysics, philosophy of mind, philosophy of language. So epistemology is the study of knowledge, how we know what we know, what is knowledge. Metaphysics is what is there in reality. What is it that exists in reality? So these disciplines, they only arose because there was disagreement. So the reason why we have a discipline called epistemology is people disagree over what knowledge is and how to arrive at knowledge. And so when you study epistemology, you study all of the disagreements regarding that. And you end up being confused normally and not being able to, because whatever you say that you study a response to that. The same with metaphysics, the same with other branches of philosophy. In Aristotle's time, these were not independent disciplines because people knew what knowledge was. They knew how to, or they thought they knew what knowledge was. They thought they knew how to arrive at knowledge. They thought they knew what reality was. The disagreements weren't there. But when with the Enlightenment and the anti-Aristotelianism, there was a fragmentation, and so what we have today is that logic has become separated from all of these things. Logic just studies formal entailment, that if it's on this form, then this follows, and even that has become highly abstract. So you study now logic as modern symbolic logic. And you have variables, you have logical functions, and all of these things are defined, and they can be arbitrarily defined. And you can have logical systems, and then you study the features of those logical systems. So it's become like computers, and it's actually logic is studied by computer scientists and mathematicians, and it's become disconnected with reality, and it's the study of how if you assume that there is a particular logical system, then what kind of things can be entailed by it. So it's very far removed from reality. There's another path from Aristotle. After Ibn Sina, instead of going to Ibn Rushd, you go to Ghazali. So these are the two historical, there's a disagreement between the two. Ibn Rushd has a refutation of Ghazali's refutation of the Falasifa. But down the line from Ghazali, you have Razi, then you have Taftazani. Taftazani, the book Discerning Religious Truth, is based on a book by Taftazānī. So through Ghazali, there was a critique of Aristotelianism, and there was a critique of Aristotelian philosophy, and but there were elements of logic and epistemology that were retained. There were elements that were discarded. There was corrections that were made, and there were elaborations that were made by Razi, that were made by Taftazānī. And all of these things were done in service of the Islamic sciences. So logic, by the time of Taftazānī, it became a science that was studied in a seminary. So students of the Islamic sciences, they would study how to interpret the Quran, they would study Arabic grammar, they would study Islamic law, and they would study logic. They would study, and I call this Islamic logic. And the reason why I call this Islamic logic is because just as Aristotelian logic was reasoning and logic within the system of thought that Aristotle had constructed, and it included implicitly questions of epistemology, questions of philosophy of mind, without them being disciplines, because it's all a coherent whole. In the same way, when it came into the Muslim scholarly tradition, there were questions of epistemology, there's questions of metaphysics, there's questions of philosophy of mind, there's questions of philosophy of language that are there embedded within the scholarly tradition, particularly in logic, because the goal of the science of logic is not merely to study the features of an entailment system. The goal of Islamic logic is to discover truth. And the goal of Islamic logic in particular is to discover religious truth. It's to discover the truth of Islam, the existence of God, the genuine messengerhood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how to interpret genuine revelation, what language means. Language is really important because language is used by God to command us, to prohibit us, to tell us what will happen after we die. And so it's all part of, so logic is all part of this larger system that has critical thinking, that reflects on the universe, but it's real. It's a system, and it's talking about the real world, and it's talking about God as well. So this logic, it's a very valuable repository of philosophical knowledge, and that's why I called the book Discerning Religious Truth, the logic and epistemology of the classical Islamic sciences. So when I wrote the book, there was a time when I was considering going into studying Islamic studies in a secular institution. I'm grateful I didn't go because what I realized over time is that within a traditional Islamic setting, when you're learning Islamic logic with a scholar and you're studying Quranic exegesis, you're studying hadith alongside, you begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You send blessings on the Prophet every time he's mentioned, and it's understood that you use it to prove the existence of God. It's a very different experience, and the way even that the logicians speak, it's very different. Like the examples that they use. Whereas if you study logic in a secular university, then in many places it will be, like the assumption is that religious people, they are not rational. God is a fairy tale, and atheists have decided, they're the masters of logic. It's a different thing. So
that's when I studied logic at uni as part of a philosophy degree. It was very atheistic, and deliberately so, actually. So yeah, absolutely right. So I think you did the right thing in not participating in such a setup.
Yeah, but I'm grateful I didn't. But I'm also grateful to Dr. Aaron Spivak for publishing this work in a reputable academic press. And I was able to call it Discerning Religious Truth, and I begin with a basmala, and I send blessings on the Prophet every time the book is written, because I think that this reflects the way that our scholars they did logic.
Yeah.
So this is a page. This is the book that I worked with. Right. So this is here it is. Like, I actually took it apart. It has old yellow pages. It's several hundred pages, and
amazing.
So this is a book by a scholar called Tahdhīb. His book is this is the Arabic text, close up of the thing that I show. So at the top, in the top line, in the first line, there's a word that has brackets around it. It says ilm. Those brackets, those are the words of Tahdhīb. So Tahdhīb, he wrote, the way that the scholars they used to write, they would write something that they called a matan. Matan is a very brief text. They don't use very many words, but every word is full of meaning. It has a definition, precise definition, and then you elaborate on that definition and you comment on the elaboration. So the first line at the top is it's a commentary around that one word. And then underneath it is a gloss, a hashia on that line. And actually underneath that, there's another hashia as well. There's another gloss. So when you read these books in the traditionally with a scholar, they're read word by word and they're explained. And sometimes you go in to see what the person is, what the scholar in the hashia is saying. You have discussions, you disagree, you go back and forth, and so it's a very it's terse, it's technical, and it requires training to understand what's going on. So what this book does is it takes all of this around this one book by Tahdhīb. Tahdhīb is one of the most important scholars of the rational Islamic sciences in the traditional seminary. He has the most important works in logic, in theology, in rhetoric, in balagha, in tafsir. He's a widely studied and cited authority. So he has a book in logic, and it's commented, has many commentaries, many glosses, and that shows the popularity of the book in the madrasa tradition. And so I took it and I reorganized it into readable English. So this is the table of contents of Discerning Religious Truth. It takes all of this kind of intertwined material and it unravels it, and it has all of the important questions in these glosses, and it's organized. There's sections, there's subsections, and it's presented in readable English. You can actually read it. There's tables, so it's still terse, but it's readable and it's explained, and so. For somebody who is trying to engage with, these old yellow pages that are, a pleasure to look and read, especially you spend such a long time with them. But this book is like, it's an aid. You can actually, it'll help you understand what's going on here, and there's a lot of scholarship, not mine, but there's a lot of scholarship of hundreds of years of very intelligent people talking to each other in very brief and terse ways that is unpacked and unraveled and put into simple, readable English. Maybe simple, maybe not simple, but readable English. There's also the way that the translation happened. So at the end, there's a glossary, and the glossary, it explains how the translation is done. Because normally these works, they're translated using Aristotelian terms, but it doesn't show what's really happening. So, for example, I'm going to touch on this in today's presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about modal logic. Modal logic developed in the Western tradition in the 20th century. All of the work in logic happened in the 20th century. Muslims, hundreds of years before that, were doing modal logic at a level that is more advanced than what people are doing today. And it offers insights and solutions to many problems in that field that people aren't even aware of. So the translations, I have at the end, there's a glossary, and it says where the translations are coming from. So some of them, they come from the philosophy of perception, some of them come to the philosophy of mind, some of them are new, and I explain where they come from. And what this does is it makes connections. So you can, when you use a term to translate an idea that is familiar in the field of the philosophy of language, then when they study the philosophy of language and they come to this book, Discerning Religious Truth, and they see that word and they see it explained and you understand how it fits within the Islamic sciences, it makes very important connections. And it helps it enables a philosophical conversation that needs to happen, because we need to take our scholarly tradition and place it into conversation with people today, and that's one of the things that this book it does, and that's why I'm kind of excited about its publication. So this is like the background to the book. This is what it is and the philosophy behind it. And I will now give an overview of what Islamic logic is all about, how it's organized, and just mention some modern applications to it. So this diagram is taken from my other book that you mentioned, Isagogi. Isagogi is isagogue. Porphyry wrote an isagogue, which is the most influential introduction to logic in the Hellenistic world, and it was studied by the Muslims, and they wrote, and it was because of its popularity in logic, it was known. Isagogue became synonymous with introduction to logic. So Muslims, when they wrote their introductions to logic, they gave it the same name, and that's the Isagogi. It's a translation. I'll show you some selections of that, but there's diagrams. It's meant to simplify. So this is a diagram from the book, and it talks about knowledge, and because logic is the study of how we arrive at knowledge. And one of the first questions that the Muslim logicians, they investigate, they say that when we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about created knowledge. We're not talking about the knowledge of God. We're talking about our knowledge, and our knowledge is created. And they describe where this science of logic comes from. And this is something that I make explicit in the Isagogi. That's one of the contributions of that book, is that it explicitly describes where the epistemology of the Muslim logicians comes from, and it comes from introspection. So basically, what the logicians did was they observed ourselves. Is an inward observation. You observe yourself, and you see that, well, I know certain things, and you accept the fact that you know these things, and then you study by looking within yourself, how do I come to know these things? And then they describe that in a very detailed way. And so when we study the science of Islamic logic, we become self-aware of exactly what's happening in my mind and how I'm going from point A to point B, and that's very useful. And it actually sharpens the mind. There's a primer in logic. It's a poem. Muslim wrote poems on everything. They wrote poems on didactic poems on grammar, didactic poems on hadith, and they would study them. People would memorize them. Right. So I memorized some, and there's some words they still kind of ring in my mind. And one of them is in the introduction to logic. It's called the Sullam. He says, وَبَعْدُ فَالْمَنْطِقُ لِلْجَنَانِ نِسْبَتُهُ كَالنَّحْوِ لِلِّسَانِ نسبته كالنحو للسان فيعصم الأفكار عن غي الخطأ وعن دقيق الفهم يكشف الغطاء. So he says that logic is the grammar of the mind. It's the grammar of the mind. So you have a spoken language, and you learn the grammar of the spoken language to protect yourself from making errors in speech. And you learn logic to protect yourself from making errors in the mental language. So there's a mental language as well, which is a modern discussion. There's a modern discussion about natural language and mental grammar. And the logicians are describing a mental language, they're describing a mental grammar, and they explicitly say that. So so it says that when you study logic, it removes the veil from very subtle understandings. You come to understand things very precisely. I'm going to illustrate some of those things today, and it protects the mind from error. And all of this, it comes from a very detailed self-observation. So this is where created knowledge comes from. And so what the logicians, they begin with is they say that there's two kinds of knowledge. There's something called conceptual knowledge, and there's something called propositional knowledge. And conceptual knowledge and propositional knowledge, it's divided into two parts. The first is there's some conceptual knowledge that is non-inferential, and there's other conceptual knowledge that is inferential. And there's some propositional knowledge that is non-inferential, and there's other propositional knowledge that is inferential. Inference is the formal process by which you go from knowledge that you know to knowledge that you don't know. So when we saw just a little while ago, if A, then B, A, therefore B, this is formal. It's the abstract form of an argument. And this is how you go from something that you know to something that you don't know. It's one way. And there are many other ways. And this process is called inference. So logicians, they explain this inference, and we study this inference. And they tell you that there are certain things that you know without inference. God creates knowledge within you without needing to formally make an argument. And then you build on that through inference, and you arrive at new knowledge, and then you go through an inference, you arrive at new knowledge, and that happens again and again, and that's how knowledge, it grows. So so God exists is knowledge. It's created knowledge. This is propositional knowledge. Propositional knowledge is knowledge that can be true or false. So when you have a statement like God exists, this is a kind of statement that can be true or it can be false. Conceptual knowledge is knowledge of the meaning of God, the meaning of existence. Before we can evaluate the truth of the proposition God exists, we need to understand what God means and what existence means. So that kind of knowledge is called conceptual knowledge. And then you have propositional knowledge, which presupposes conceptual knowledge. So far so good?
So far so good.
Okay. So this is from my Isa Hoji. And this is my English language commentary on the book, and it describes how we discover purely rational conceptual knowledge, because you can have revelatory conceptual knowledge and rational conceptual knowledge. So there are these things called universals. These are very important in classical logic, and they're important for Islamic logic as well. And there's medieval discussions on the problems of universals. They're not that important for the Muslim logicians, but this idea of universals is an important part of logic. Logic is possible because we have knowledge of universals. So we acquire conceptual knowledge of particular objects in the extramental world by directly observing them ourselves. This is the first way. So I'm going to illustrate this. But the reason why I took this snippet, this is a small snippet from many other things, but the reason why I brought this snippet was I wanted to illustrate that when we study Islamic logic, we are studying the knowledge of the real world. We're not stuck in our minds and we're unable to get out of our minds. Like in Western philosophy, like this is like the perennial problem. But we're observing how we have knowledge of the real world, and there's a metaphysics, there's a philosophy of mind that is implicit in here. And as we study logic, we're studying knowledge, we're studying how we acquire knowledge. So there's questions of epistemology that are being answered, and everything is being put in its proper place. And all of these things are fine-tuned so that you come to a proper understanding of God, so that you come to a proper understanding of the meaning of a Quranic verse, so that you come to a proper understanding of the meaning of a hadith. So it's very nice. It's very nice. I like it a lot. So the first part of it, it says that you observe things like a particular man whose name is Zayd. So I observe a particular man. There's Zayd. Or Paul. So I observe Paul. When I observe Paul, there's the Paul that's out there, in the real world. When I observe him, then after that observation, I find within myself that I have conceptual knowledge of Paul. What is conceptual knowledge? Conceptual knowledge is a concept in my mind. And this concept in my mind represents you. And I can think about you. I can infer things about you. Why? Because when I observe you, this conceptual knowledge appears within me. God creates it. And so it's how it appears, what's the mechanisms. That's not really a problem for us, because it's just the only thing I need to know is that when I see you, then I have conceptual knowledge of you. But I can also have conceptual knowledge through indirect observation, through the eyewitness testimony of other people. So this is the science of hadith. So in the science of hadith, when I read Bukhari and he said that he was informed by so-and-so, was informed from so-and-so, that he saw the Prophet and this particular thing happened, this is an extension of my personal knowledge. And this is another way in which I can observe things and arrive at conceptual knowledge of them rationally. The science of hadith is actually a rational science. And the third way is by using inference. So when I use my minds to infer the existence of God, of a necessary being, based on the contingency of the universe, I arrive at conceptual knowledge of the fact that there is a being who doesn't need anything, on whom the world depends. So these are ways in which I acquire rational conceptual knowledge. Then this rational conceptual knowledge, there's something called singular conceptual knowledge and universal conceptual knowledge. So there's a singular concept and there's a universal concept. A singular concept is when a singular concept is something that it's like Paul, the concept of Paul in my mind. I can say, this is Paul right there. That this is Paul, right? This is, so when I say this is Paul, I am using this concept in my mind of Paul, and I'm saying that this is Paul. This is a singular concept because it only applies to one individual in the real world. But you can also have we also have universal conceptual knowledge, because when I observe Paul and I observe Ahmed and I observe John and I observe Mary, then what I do is I abstract from all of these instances. This is something that the mind is able to do. I abstract the universal concept of human. And so I can say that Paul is human and Zayd is human and John is human and Mary is human. And so this concept of human, this is a universal concept. And it's something that the human mind has the ability to abstract from individual instances. And all of logic is based on these universal concepts. So part of logic is studying universal concepts. And we study the various kinds of universal concepts. There's something called the 5 universals. And we examine the universal concepts in the mind, and we see what kind they are, and then how we can compose them to make definitions and arrive at conceptual knowledge. So, and then so now I will arrive at knowledge of what God means, what existence means, and then I can evaluate the truth of the proposition God exists. So this is like a quick overview of the kinds of discussions that we would find in this part of logic. The next thing I wanted to share with you is what is a proposition exactly? So when I say Zayd is human, so this is a discussion in logic. They discuss the difference between a propositional statement and a definitional statement. They're two different things. So when I say Zayd is human, this is a proposition. This proposition is not affirming a conceptual identity between the concept of Zayd and the concept of human. But what's happening is that when I say Zayd is human, so in logic, we also study the relation between words on the tongue and concepts in the mind. It's called signification. So when I say Zayd is human, these are words in a particular language that I utter with the tongue. And these words, they signify concepts in the mind. And these concepts in the mind are conceptual knowledge of real things that we acquire through observation, through inference, through the various means. So I guess what I want to show you is that what we're doing in logic isn't merely symbolic logic of symbols that are cryptic and nobody really understands and looks like a computer program. Right? We are studying how we know what we know at a very very deep level. So when I say Zayd is human with the tongue, then it signifies a concept Zayd in my mind, and have conceptual knowledge of Zayd by observing the particular person Zayd. And then human, this is a universal concept that I arrived at by abstracting from particular instances. And when I say Zayd is human, what am I doing? I use the concept of the subject to identify a real person. So the logicians, they say that when I say Zayd is human, the concept Zayd is being used to identify an extra mental thing, an extra propositional reality. And then when I say human, I'm saying that thing that the concept is referencing, the concept references something that's beyond it. Reference, by the way, it's also a term in the philosophy of language, and there's a lot that's been written about it, and so one of the contributions of Discerning Religious Truth and these works is it chooses the right word, and it's locating it within a contemporary philosophical discussion. So the concept in the mind references something that's beyond it, and then when I say human, what I'm doing is I'm saying that thing that is referenced by the concept is a human being. So it's very significant, right? So I can, you assured me that I could come on your channel and talk about all of these things.
I did.
So otherwise, like, I don't have anybody to talk to. Like, like I can't talk about this with my children. I can't talk about this with my wife.
Well, you've got a very bright son. I thought you might be able to talk to him about it. But anyway.
Oh yeah, he does. He's taking my I'm teaching this, so he's taking my course, and so he's learning. So I'm talking. Actually, the Kalam 2.0 program that I talked about the last time I came on your channel, it's just an excuse for me to talk to people about these things in a structured way. Yeah. Otherwise, so there's something called the liar paradox. There's something. So this is. It's found in it has a long history, and Muslim logicians, they discuss it. So the liar paradox goes like this.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It says that everything that I say today is false.
I've heard this before. Yeah. It's a great paradox. If it's true, then
Yeah. Everything. So this will solve it. This is going to solve the liar paradox.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'll show you how. But let's understand the liar paradox. So everything that I say today is false. Right. So when it's made by someone who says nothing else on that day, so it has to be that qualification. Everything I say today is false, and that's the only thing that I said today. So now, if it's true that everything I say today is false, then it means that this statement is false, because it's the only thing I said today. And if it's and what's the opposite? How does the opposite go? Its truth entails its falsity, and its falsity entails its truth. How does its falsity its truth? Can you work that one out? Because if it's false, that everything that I say today is false, then that means that this statement is true.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's true, then it's false.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so this is the problem here is self-reference. The problem here is that I am talking about the proposition itself. I'm using the proposition to talk about the proposition. And so but that's not what a proposition is. A proposition is not talking about itself. A proposition is talking about something beyond itself. It's talking about an extra propositional reality.
Yeah.
So if you look at the way that they mapped this out, I use the concept Zaid to refer to something outside the proposition. The proposition describes reality, truth, and what it means for a proposition to be true is that it corresponds to a reality beyond the proposition that it is describing. And what it means for a proposition to be false is that the reality that is describing is not the way that it's being described. Mm-hmm. But if I use the proposition to refer to itself, then there is no extra propositional reality that I'm describing. And that's why you end up in this paradox. So it's not really a proposition. It just gives the illusion of being a proposition.
Exactly.
So I thought so this is predication. So this is what predication is. Now, when I define things, actually, so what's predication? The subject concept identifies, and the predicate concept it attributes. When I define things, definitions are not predications. So when I say human is rational animal, there's no extra propositional reality that I'm describing. So this is another question that is investigated in the science of logic. They'll say that what you're actually doing when you're constructing a definition is you're taking concepts in your mind and you're putting them together and you're saying that this concept is the same as that concept, and you're not describing anything beyond it. And so definitions technically cannot be true or false. That requires a little bit of thought and explanation, but I wanted to just give snippets of things that the logicians, they talk about. Definitions create. Okay, so here's something else. So this is, I think that the most important discussion in for modern Islamic theology, the most important discussions in classical Islamic logic are discussions of modalities. So when you take a proposition like the sun is shining, it consists of a subject, the sun. It consists of a predicate, shining, and it consists of a copula, the thing that connects the subject to the predicate. In Arabic, the copula isn't stated. We say it's a rabit, but in Greek it's stated, in English it's stated. So you have the subject, you have the predicate, and you have the copula. This is the thing that connects the subject and the predicate. So most people, when they think of a proposition, they say, okay, I have the subject, I have the predicate, I have the copula. It's either true or false. But the Muslim logicians, they say that no, this is an incompletely constituted proposition. Because in order to constitute a proposition, you have to have the subject, you have to have the predicate, you have to have the copula, and you have to have a modality. You have to have a modality. And the modality, so meaning that is the sun necessarily shining? Is it possibly shining? Is it continuously shining? Is it actually shining? These are modalities. And they explain what modalities are. And it's very interesting the way that they explain what a modality is. They say that a modality is an attribute of the predication. It's the way in which things are true. And it's a real thing. So meaning that when I look at the sun, I say, hey, the sun is shining. I have knowledge that the sun is shining, but I have knowledge not just that the sun is shining, because X is Y can be the is has qualities. There's different ways that is can be. If that's you get the is can be. So in this case, the sun is shining. It can be you can mean it's continuously shining, it's actually shining, or it's possibly shining. I'm going to explain, but not necessarily. So in this case, with what I perceive is continuously the sun is shining. So continuously is a kind of is, and that's what a modality is. A modality is the kind of is. And the important thing, I think, one of the contributions of Islamic logic is that this modality, it's metaphysical. It's a metaphysical modality. In modern logic, modalities are not metaphysical. They're just part of logical systems. And there's something called possible world semantics. I talk about that a little bit in the footnotes of this book. But the modal logic of the Muslim logicians is very different. So this is a very simplified presentation of modalities. So what something can be, so somebody says God exists, right? So you can make this statement, God exists, and somebody can intend possibly God exists. Possibly. What does this mean? It means that this is within the realm of possibility. It's like I say, possibly unicorns exist. Unicorns exist, possibly. This is one kind of modality, one way in which something can be true. Then you go one notch up from that, and you go from the realm of possibility to the realm of actuality. So you can say God exists actually. right? This is like saying that actually, right now, I am talking to Paul. Actually, right? This is an actuality. So this is so possibility means that it could happen. Actuality means it happened. And then you can say continuously God exists. So when we say fire burns, the Muslim logicians, they'll explain that what we mean is continuously fire burns, not necessarily. And that this is really important, it's really significant, because for a scientist, it's necessarily, or a materialist, it's necessarily, not a scientist. But for us, continuously fire burns, but not necessarily, but continuously. So there's things that when we perceive the regularities in nature, we perceive continuity. We don't perceive necessity. So something that is continuously true, it's continuously is more than actually, but it's still not necessarily, because something could be continuously true, but it doesn't have to be true. It's possible for it not to be true. And the strongest of these is necessity, necessarily. So this means that not only is it always the case, but it has to be the case. It's not possible for it not to be the case. So when I say God exists, I mean necessarily God exists. But when somebody, for example, makes Stephen Meyer, right? He makes, in his God hypothesis, he makes an argument for the existence of God. And his argument for the existence of God is that God is the best explanation for the design in the universe. This, when he comes to this conclusion that God is the best explanation for the design in the universe, his conclusion is not going to be necessarily God exists. Because a scientific inference, it leads to a modality of continuous continuity or actuality, but not necessity. And this is a discussion that straddles Islamic theology and Islamic logic. Mustafa Sabri actually said this in his 4-volume Mawqif al-Ilm wal-Aql. Mustafa Sabri was the last Shaykh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire, and he is my favorite theologian.
Oh, is he?
So,
I don't know. Oh, I see.
He has a lot of these discussions. He was because these things, like what I'm this was like bread and butter for the scholars of the Ottoman Empire. For us, it's like we think they did this, they memorized this, they did this, they studied these issues to death, and then at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, when modernity came, they had an engagement with modern philosophy, and they brought all of these things to bear. And they made statements that are really profound, but you only appreciate them if you study Islamic logic. Otherwise, people don't understand or what he's saying. So one of the things he says is that scientific statements they result in a modality of continuity and actuality, but not necessity. And that's why science cannot be used to prove the existence of God, because what is sought in proving the existence of God is a modality of necessity. And he'll argue that scripturally as well. So it's an interesting discussion. And then these modalities, they're a part of of the tradition of Islamic logic. So and what I've presented here is highly simplified, right? It gets very complicated. So this is a snippet from Discerning Religious Truth. So in Discerning Religious Truth, it goes through all of the modalities. And so it talks about, so for example, extensionally necessary proposition. So you have something called extensional necessity and intentional necessity. This was only discovered in the 20th century. This is a 20th century discussion in modal logic. It has to do with this idea that some things are true intrinsically, some things are necessarily true intrinsically, and other things are necessarily true because of the mental concepts that you use to reference them. And that goes back to the definition of propositions that we saw earlier. So and the translation in Discerning Religious Truth of the concepts in Islamic logic is informed by these discussions in these modern 20th century philosophical discussions. It comes out in the translation, which is why it's an important. I think it's a very important resource for Muslims who are seeking to understand what our scholarly tradition has to say on a lot of philosophical issues. So coming back here, there's extensional necessity. So there's something called broad intentional necessity. There's something called specific time necessity, something being necessary at specific time, and there's many other kinds of modalities. And it plays out because one of the things that's discussed in the science of Islamic logic is contradiction. So what is contradiction? Contradiction is, this is from Isa Hoji. This is an introductory work. This is from my Isa Hoji. Contradiction is for two propositions to differ in affirmation and negation, such that the difference intrinsically entails the truth of one and the falsity of the other. Like Zayd is writing, Zayd is not writing. So contradiction is a relation between two propositions, such that if one proposition is true, its contradiction has to be false. And if the contradiction is true, then this proposition has to be false. And we study like how to work them out. And here's like a diagram from my Isa Hoji textbook. So for example, if you say all A is B, then the contradiction of all A is B is some A is not B. It's not no A is B, which what people would imagine. So if I say that all what's a universal statement? All
men are mortal.
All men are mortal. So what's the contradiction of that? Some man is not mortal. So if you prove that some man is not mortal, then you've contradicted this. And you don't have to universally prove that no men are mortal. So this illustrates this, and we study this in logic. But what I wanted to show was that when you bring in modalities into the picture, now working out what the contradiction of a proposition is, it's more complicated, right? So this is a snippet from Discerning Religious Truth. It says that it explains why, if you have a proposition with a modality of necessity, its contradiction is going to have the modality of possibility. So, but there's something called broad possibility. So this is a distinction. They're so precise. They're so precise. It's really you really learn to respect like the Muslim scholarly tradition when you do this. They're really precise, and they're really intelligent, mashallah. So there's something called broad possibility and strict possibility. And again, this is a modern translation of and that is understood today. And this is a distinction of this book, because we do have students of the traditional Islamic sciences who still study these works, but they can't express them. They can't express what they study accurately in English. But this is an accurate expression. So because broad possibility is for something not to be necessary. Strict possibility is for something to be possible. So strict possibility excludes actuality, and continuity. Broad possibility is anything that's not necessary. It includes all of these. So you work out that when you have a contradiction of a statement that is necessary, then the contradiction will be possible. And you work out that if the statement is continuous, if that's the modality, then its contradiction will be actuality, but broad, not strict. And then it can get really complicated, right? And so there's a modality of strict intentional necessity. Every writer, strictly, as long as he's a writer, necessarily moves his fingers. there's a when you study this in logic, you learn why. So this is a necessity. This is necessary. This is called intentional necessity. So why? Because it is necessary for a writer to be moving his fingers. A writer must be moving his fingers. Because if you're writing, you have to be moving your fingers. But is it really necessary for him to be moving his fingers? No. But it's only necessary by virtue of the fact that I'm referring to him as a writer. It's called intentional necessity. And it has and when I do and this is a 20th century discussion in modern modal logic. And so it's contradiction. It looks like this. And these things are things that in the Western philosophical tradition, nobody's worked out. Nobody's worked these things out. And the detail and precision with which the Muslims have done, it's really amazing. So I think the last thing that I wanted to describe is, this is from the end of the book on Isagoji, something called non-inferential propositions. So when we study logic, we learn about knowledge being conceptual knowledge or propositional knowledge, and that conceptual knowledge, there's something that's non-inferential, and there's inferential, and there's propositional knowledge. There's kinds of propositions. We study modalities. We study how to do contradictions. We study how to do conversions, and then we at the end they say that here are the kinds of propositions that you know are true without needing to prove them true. And so there are, and they categorize them. And this is optimized for the study of kalam. It's optimized for proving the truth of Islam, and for rational theology. So they talk about 6 kinds of propositions. So there's something called the self-evident proposition. This is a self-evident proposition is a proposition whose meaning entails its truth. So in modern philosophy, this is the analytic proposition, right? That the meaning of it, of its terms, entails that it is true. But there are other kinds of propositions that we know are true without needing to infer their truth. And so there could be external observation, internal observation, introspection. They talk about regularities. So we observe regularities, and when we observe regularities, this is a non-inferential. We non-inferentially infer the truth of the fact that photosynthesis, when the sun shines, the plant will grow. And we study this, how this happens, and tested propositions, intuited propositions. So in the Isagoji textbook, I have a chapter there on scientific reasoning. That's also a new contribution, but it's based on what our Muslim logicians did, and we have something called tested and intuited propositions that corresponds to modern scientific reasoning. And I make the connections, and we look at how we know that everything is made of atoms, and how that scientific reasoning process works, and how it fits into what the Muslim logicians they taught. And what that enables is it enables a connection. So if you understand the modality of scientific reasoning, you understand how you arrive at the truth of scientific propositions, and all of this is used to construct arguments for the existence of God, for the truth of Islam, for Quranic interpretation, for Hadith interpretation, then you have a very coherent system for engaging with modern questions that are of theological relevance, and that's what Islamic logic is all about.
Very interesting. Now, modal logic, if I may ask quickly, people like William Lane Craig, how do their research in that field relate to Islamic theology? Is that dogs barking in the background?
Yeah, it's dogs barking in the background. And
clarify.
outside. Yeah. Sorry.
Modal logic, is that something that William Lane Craig has developed in the Christian sphere? He's a contemporary philosopher of religion, is he not?
No, so William Lane Craig is known for his Kalam cosmological argument. So what he did was he took the Muslim arguments for the fact that the universe began to exist and how that proves the existence of God, and he brought those into conversation with the science of the Big Bang.
Right.
So, but he's not attentive to modalities. And that leads to certain mistakes in his arguments. Right. The Christian philosopher who's most well known for his work in modalities is Alvin Plantinga.
Plantinga is the one I should have said.
Yeah, he has a book called The Nature of Necessity.
He's one for modal logic, of course.
Yeah. There's a field called modal metaphysics, which is what the Muslim logicians are doing. And so that would make a very interesting engagement.
That would, yeah. Think about that, Craig. Yeah, good. Well, I guess that's it. I'm not really knowledgeable enough or equipped to discuss this further. Having attempted to study logic at university, not that kind of logic, but in the Western analytical tradition, I think it put me off for life. But because it was rather, but this is much more because you're addressing questions of truth and metaphysics and God. There was something never addressed in the course that I attended at University of London.
I hope it sparks an interest amongst people to learn more about what our tradition has to offer, and to use it to address modern issues. I think there's a wealth of resources that we can think on, reflect on. Yeah.
And we'll put the links in the description below, of course, so people can read the book, access the book themselves, inshallah. So thank you very much.
Books.
Well, that's even better. Well, thank you very much, Shaykh Hamza Karamali, for your expertise, your time, your patience, and your contributions to human knowledge in service of the Ummah, of course.
Exactly. Inshallah. May Allah use all of it. What's pleasing to Him. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.